Feds, Federal Employee Defense Services. I want to thank everyone for attending today's webinar on liability insurance for EPA employees. Before we get started, just a little bit of information about myself. I am a former federal employee. I was an attorney in the federal government for many years, and then I worked many years in private practice defending federal officials at a variety of different agencies before starting Feds, before starting this company. I have a lot of information to get through in 15 minutes, so I'm going to jump right into it. We're going to start with just a little bit of a history lesson here. Liability exposure for federal employees really began back in the early 1970s with this Supreme Court decision. This was the first decision that allowed federal employees to be sued in their personal capacity and actually be liable for a judgment for simply doing their job. So it was in the response to this ruling that the concept, the idea for federal employee professional liability insurance was created. And of course, it was later expanded to cover attorney fees, investigations for administrative matters, disciplinary actions, criminal cases. All that was in response to increased federal employee scrutiny. Also in response to this ruling, Congress passed legislation requiring federal agencies to reimburse managers, supervisors, and law enforcement officers up to 1/2 of the cost of the annual premium for the liability insurance. So this is important. This is huge. You really need to appreciate that this demonstrates Congress's official support for liability insurance and their understanding that there are risks associated with your federal employment that cannot be completely cured with legislations. So there are 3 areas of liability exposure that we're going to talk about today: civil, administrative, and criminal. In other words, liability insurance is important if you are ever sued in your personal capacity for a job-related action, investigated due to allegations of wrongdoing, or subject of a criminal investigation. We're going to start out with civil exposure. The liability insurance essentially provides you with your own personal attorney to defend if you get sued in your personal capacity. And the policy will also indemnify you if you are liable for a judgment for one of these personal capacity lawsuits. And that's what these lawsuits are called: personal capacity lawsuits, constitutional torts, Bivens actions, individual capacity lawsuits, whatever they're called. What you need to appreciate and understand for today's presentation is that you do not have absolute immunity for these kinds of lawsuits like you do for lawsuits under the Federal Tort Claims Act. You only have what's called qualified immunity for these types of lawsuits. So you can be held personally liable. 3 basic concepts I want you to take away from today's discussion: representation, immunity, indemnification. First, representation. DOJ representation, believe it or not, is not mandatory and it's not automatic. It is the sole discretion of DOJ to decide whether they want to rep you in a personal capacity lawsuit. It's a 2-part test. Were you acting within the scope of your employment, and is it in the interest of the United States to represent you? So let's say you're being investigated for some sort of wrongdoing. For the very same reason that you're being sued, you can see that DOJ is not going to want to be on both sides of that. So while you still may be able to get the case bounced on qualified immunity, you will be responsible for hiring your own lawyer to get that done if you didn't have liability insurance. The insurance also will appoint what's called coverage counsel in certain cases, where we'll appoint coverage counsel to kind of oversee and not necessarily supervise, but be involved with DOJ's representation to ensure that your interests are being looked out for. And we also may assign coverage counsel if DOJ is on the fence as to whether they want to represent you or not. Coverage counsel will try to convince them that it is in the interest of the United States to represent you. The immunity, we talked about that. We talked about that concept, that you don't have absolute immunity for these types of lawsuits. The final concept is indemnification. So even if DOJ is representing you, what you need to appreciate is that's still a lawsuit against you personally. Therefore, you can still be liable for the judgment if DOJ represents you and you lose. Okay? The Fed's policy provides indemnification protection up to $1 million or $2 million to pay that judgment in the event that you are liable and your agency does not indemnify you. So, just a quick recap of our civil discussion. You can be sued, DOJ can deny rep, and you can be liable for a judgment. How does the insurance protect you? Provides legal defense, will appoint coverage counsel, and pays damages if you're liable. A final point I would like to make regarding your civil exposure is that civil suits without DOJ representation are rare, okay, with actual liability, personal liability, even rarer. Probably less than 5% of the lawsuits that are filed, against federal officials would result in no representation. In fact, if you've attended an agency-sponsored liability seminar and the attorney doing the presentation sort of questioned the need for liability insurance, it's because they're approaching it from this perspective, the civil perspective only. They say, look, only a few small percentage of the cases are going to slip through the cracks. But like I always say, for $270 a year or $135 after the reimbursement, why would you risk it? Why would you risk being one of the ones, the few percentages that actually slip through the cracks? Next, we're going to talk about administrative matters. This is typically the biggest bang for your buck for federal officials and the liability insurance. So whether it's a response to a major accident, such as for you EPA employees, a chemical or hazardous material incident, hurricane, inland oil spill, tanker truck incident, bioagent attack, ammunition disposal, law enforcement, drug busts, or even something more common to your everyday function. What you should appreciate is that if it is perceived that you or your agency has failed in its regulatory mission at all, you can be certain that there will be a demand of accountability. That's the name of the game these days, the accountability. These accountability demands can take the form of complaints, allegations, investigations, proposed disciplinary actions, as well as possibility of civil suits, which we just talked about. So this is any administrative matter that could result in a personnel action against you. The Fed's policy will appoint you an attorney up to $200,000 to defend what I call cradle to grave, from the start of any investigation up to the conclusion, and in the unfortunate event that there's a disciplinary action proposed against you, the Fed's policy will defend both at the agency level and before the MSPB if necessary. So what are some of the common allegations of wrongdoing? Here you have them. Whether you're an on-scene coordinator, an OSC, first responders, COTAR, scientists, biologists, compliance and enforcement officer, everyone is vulnerable. And more often than not, it is the everyday regulator and the enforcement functions that result in complaints and allegations that lead to investigations. As you know, Congress is continually prompted by public health and environmental groups to investigate EPA actions or inactions. There's requests for investigations, lawsuits from interest groups challenging the process and pace of EPA's role and responsibilities. There's just simply, a lot of accountability demands out there. Just yesterday, the Supreme Court ruled against the EPA, very publicized ruling against the EPA in the Idaho wetlands case, basically saying that landowners can now sue the EPA to fight compliance orders. While this lawsuit that the Supreme Court has authorized is not a suit against the EPA employees, it's against the EPA, so not you personally, but you can bet your bottom dollar if there's a judicial decision against the EPA regarding one of these compliance orders, there will be some level of agency inquiry involving the agency decision makers. You know, the Washington Post, you know, reported today, the justice, this quote, they said, the justices have made it clear that EPA bureaucrats are answerable to the law and the courts just like the rest of us. So it's all about this call for accountability. And in addition to your day job, like I used to call it, you know, the business of the agency, if you are a manager or a supervisor, you also have exposures associated with those managerial duties, such as whistleblower reprisal, ethics complaints, EEO complaints. The Fed's policy will provide protection for all of those as well. Because it's just such a big responsibility at the EPA in your agency, I want to briefly speak a little bit about the on-scene coordinators, the OSCs, that I mentioned before. Here are some of the responsibilities that could result in accountability demands or investigations against you. So if the EPA sues the owner of a property, for example, every single piece of paper relating to that case will be scrutinized by the defendant's attorneys. They'll be looking for any illegal, unauthorized action on your part, whether it's intentional or not, to get the case tossed. This is big stakes stuff. And if you know this, if you're involved in an environmental investigation involving a big company, a Fortune 500 company, you'll have teams of lawyers analyzing your every action or inaction. It'll be like a microscope. Not to mention the Superfund fights, the Superfund sites that are often accompanied by a lot of media sensation and public scrutiny. There's just a lot of scrutiny on EPA officials these days, and it's not because you guys are bad and you're bad civil servants and not doing your job. To the contrary, the EPA employees I know are some of the most dedicated, hardworking civil servants out there. It's just that the laws that you're required to enforce and regulate are controversial. They affect people. They affect property. So when that is being challenged, people are going to look for any way to fight back, and that could result in investigations of you. And just to recap, this is what the insurance, from an administrative perspective, provides in these administrative disciplinary matters. It will defend against the allegations. Ultimately, it will prepare you for the agency administrative investigation process, attend the investigative interview with you if permitted, and then ultimately defend in any resulting personnel action against you, both at the agency level and at the MSPB. And finally, our third exposure area, and very quickly, is criminal exposure. Now, as federal officials, I know you didn't come to work today to violate criminal law, to be a criminal, but you need to really understand that there is very little you can do wrong in the federal government and not have it also be a violation of Title 18, which is the criminal code. Some of the most common criminal investigations involving federal employees usually involve conflict of interest statutes where intent is not a prerequisite to prove the crime, misappropriation of federal funds, release of Privacy Act or other statutorily protected information. Really, any situation arising out of an allegation or misuse or abuse of your position or authority could actually result in a criminal investigation of you. If you are notified that you are the subject of a criminal investigation, it is absolutely important for you to talk to and/or retain a criminal defense attorney before you talk to anyone. You have constitutional rights. You have the same constitutional rights against the government as any citizen when there is a criminal investigation involving you, notwithstanding that they're also your employer. Just to mention briefly, have comment about the Deutsche Bank fire, infamous one, throughout the EPA. Most folks are very, very well aware of this situation where the Deutsche Bank building in New York City, during a demolition project, it caught fire, ended up killing 2 New York City firefighters. The unfortunate irony here is that the building was damaged because of 9/11. The very firefighters who died in the building also responded and survived, in 9/11, and it was just a really heart-wrenching story. And what happened is the New York District Attorney's Office was looking to hold people accountable and was looking to hold people criminally accountable, and they actually ran a criminal manslaughter investigation against some of the contractors that were involved. And EPA employees were required to participate in that investigation, participate in the grand jury. I believe the branch chief, the lead program coordinator, all 5 of the on-scene coordinators were all subpoenaed to testify, and there was very limited EPA counsel support. Requests for DOJ, Department of Justice assistance, was denied. So while the EPA officials were not being criminally investigated themselves, everybody was kind of blaming them, was trying to point fingers at them. So this investigation was pretty scary stuff for these employees who were involved in it. And, they were really left there without any real major agency support. So having the liability insurance in place would give you that great peace of mind to know that if one of these tragedies happened under your watch and there comes this demand of accountability, you're going to have peace of mind that you're going to be able to get the legal attention, the legal counsel that you need to be able to go forward and respond to that type of investigation. Keith Glenn is an EPA employee in Region 2 who is heavily involved in this matter, and he's offered his 2 cents up if anybody wants to contact him. If you call our office or shoot us an email, we'll give you his contact information, and he'll tell you about his experience that he had. This is just a recap of what the insurance covers. And folks, I've been defending federal employees for many years now, and I really founded feds to protect hardworking civil servants. Whether the complaint comes from a member of the public, special interest group, industry, politically motivated official, subordinate employee, or other employee, the thought that an investigation requiring legal counsel could never happen to you is really naive these days. It's really simply the cost of doing business. Even if you're ultimately vindicated of the allegations, with lawyer rates ranging from $300 to $400 an hour, these costs will add up very, very quickly. And in fact, the cost for just 1 hour of legal services in this regard costs more than the liability insurance costs. So it's $270 annually or $370 for the $2 million limit. And again, if you are eligible, if you're a manager or a supervisor or in law enforcement, you're eligible to have your agency reimburse you up to 1/2. And most agencies are capping that reimbursement at the 150 limit. I should also mention here that payroll deduction at $12 a pay period is also available for those who want to spread the cost of the insurance throughout the entire year. Before I conclude, just a real important notice for EPA employees. If anybody's read any insurance policies, your homeowners, any kind of insurance policy, professional one that you would get, you know that there's all these lists of exclusions for pollution, asbestos, other securities, other related stuff. And in the past, I know there have been other liability insurance providers that have actually used that exclusion to preclude covering EPA employees in matters that that involve the subject matter of that exclusion. So EPA employees were saying, well, why would I get the insurance then if my subject matter, what I do every day, is going to be excluded from coverage? The Fed's policy does not do that, okay? And we have this specific notice that we'll provide you, we'll put on letterhead. The Fed's policy, this type of exclusion does not apply to you if it's your professional responsibility to engage in the actual matter, to be involved in that matter that is listed in the exclusion. What would you buy the policy for if we didn't treat it this way? So another way of saying it, those exclusions, that you see, those environmental related exclusions, do not apply to EPA employees because their job has them engaging in that subject matter. This is my final slide, and it's an important one. I can't emphasize this point enough, that you need to have the coverage in place prior to the allegation happening. Just like your car insurance. You can't get in a car accident on Monday, buy your insurance from Geico on Wednesday. You are not going to be covered. I can't tell you how many people call the office after their house is on fire, that if they just would have took the time to get enrolled a month earlier, they would have been fully covered. There's 3 ways to get enrolled. The easiest is to go online at fedsprotection.com. You buy now. It takes less than 5 minutes to do it online, and you'll be able to print your certificate of insurance right there. You can also download our one-page enrollment form, or we can send it to you, and you can fax or mail that in. Or if you want to talk to a live person, give us a call. We've got people standing by who would love to talk to you and love to get you enrolled. So that's it for my presentation today, and I guess I would open the floor up for questions.
Tony, you did a good job. We don't have any questions.
That's what I like to hear. So I wish everybody a good day, and I hope you got the information that you need so that you can make an informed decision as to whether you need liability insurance. Thank you.